Good morning, everybody. So what a great keynote. Really enjoyed that. So we've talked a lot about costs at the conference, and I guess we've kind of kept it at 1 or 2 slides on costs. This is really the opportunity to go a little bit deeper on costs. So we're going to go a couple clicks down on how to think about costs. I spent the last 6 months in spreadsheets helping customers think through how they compare on-premise costs to costs in the cloud. And I guess over enough customers, you start to see some pattern recognition. And the pattern recognition is really around how do I do good cost comparisons? What are all of the cost elements that I need to include? How should I think about things like power, cooling, admin costs? So what are the true costs? Are there intangible costs I need to include in my calculations? So my goal really with this session is to have you guys leave a little bit smarter in how to do good cost comparisons. In case there are things that you're missing, give you some practical tips, some tools on how to do those cost comparisons so that you can respond to your business and say, this is how much we might save, this is how much we did save, here's our cost model, here's how we think about it. So I'm joined by 2 people today. Couldn't be more excited to have them here. I think you'll learn the most from their discussions. First of all, we're going to have Vladimir Mitevski from Thomson Reuters. He's going to talk about how he did those cost calculations and how some of the tools that we're going to present today compare to the cost calculations he did on his spreadsheets. Then we're going to have Kris Bliesner from SecondWatch. And SecondWatch is a company that really specializes in helping companies with these cost comparisons. So they've done hundreds of these cost comparisons. He's going to share some best practices and some of that pattern recognition that he sees as he talks to customers. So just to kind of start out then, are the cost savings real? I'm just going to spend a few slides to share with you some of the cost savings that we're seeing out there from our customers. So this is Samsung. Samsung are on record as saying they think they've saved $34 million with AWS. How did they do that? They actually run their Smart Hub application at AWS. That serves all the content to all of their devices. It authenticates the users and serves content across their DVDs, Blu-ray players, and set-top boxes and TVs. There's another company, Global Blue. Global Blue, they process service tax and VAT. Many countries around the world, millions of transactions. Their BI reporting tool runs on AWS. Again, they've estimated they save about $1 million by running that on AWS rather than having it on-premise. But cost savings aren't just about doing the same thing that you've always done for less. They're about enabling you to do new work because it's cost-effective to do that new work. In this example, NASDAQ had this application that they wanted to launch called Market Replay. And this is going to be an application that allowed them to look at historic transactions to see whether they executed on time. So the person that wanted to launch this application got a quote from their internal IT, and they said, wow, that's going to be very expensive. It's going to take a long time. I'm just going to start that with AWS, see if we have any success with it. They launched it for $50 in the first month. Market Replay is now a hugely successful application for them. So cost savings are about doing new work as well as doing the same work that you've always done. Similar note, NASA, on the kind of time versus cost trade-off, they were able to process a bunch of images in a very short amount of time, 200,000 images in a matter of hours instead of 15 days. So the cost differences allow them to change the equation on how they do work, and they could do this massively parallel work. So what I really want to talk about is a couple of the fundamental economic reasons for those cost savings, and then we're going to switch over to how do you do good cost comparisons. So let's have a look at some of the economic reasons. So I talked a little bit about this idea of being able to not have to plan your resources for peak, but instead be able to kind of pay as you go and pay on demand and match the resources to the demand. So what we have here is kind of a fake web application. So the web application, someone is expecting 200,000 users when they're planning for this application. So that's the axis there, 200,000, 300,000, 600,000. So the number of users, you could think of that for the web application. So, the application owner is predicting 200,000 users, and what you see in the bar charts is the capacity that they would have required to support that number of users in the traditional on-premise model. So Q1, they did great capacity planning. So they had a little bit of wasted capacity, but that was fine. They got 180,000 users, pretty close to the 200,000 users they predicted. So everyone had a great experience, just a little bit of waste on the capacity. Q2, unfortunately, with that same amount of capacity, they couldn't quite react quick enough. They got a little bit more demand than they expected. Great for the business. And you heard Werner talking about you should try and match the resources of the business. Great for the business. But unfortunately, with that little capacity, the customers had a really poor experience. So the performance started to wane. There was a bit of a lag in some of the performance of the pages. So they said, you know what, we're not going to have that happen again. Fortunately, these guys could order equipment pretty quickly on a quarterly basis, many are on an annual basis. So on that quarterly basis, they said, yep, let's go for it on the next quarter. We're not going to have that happen again. Unfortunately, demand went down a little bit in the white line, so that, again, they kind of overshot. Q4, they knew it was going to be a big holiday push, so let's really get the infrastructure ready. Great, and they met the demand, fantastic. Unfortunately, by Q1, they still held all of that capacity, and that's all wastage. So that's kind of economic reason number one why the cloud is more efficient. And this is the idea that you can match the resources to the demand. So you pay only for what you use. And you can replace that upfront capital expenditure with this low variable cost. With reserved instances, you can lower that cost even further. There was a little bit of discussion of those reserved instances. Most customers who have some predictable capacity or some predictable knowledge over the next 1 or 3 year time horizon can use reserved instances to lower their cost. You pay a small upfront cost and then have a lower hourly charge. Those things, reserved instances, can save up to 71% versus on-demand instances. So adding reserved instances into the mix helps you lower that cost equation. So that's kind of economic reason number two. Then economic reason number three, why the cloud is so much more cost effective, is this kind of virtuous circle that Andy talked about. As AWS grows, our cost base decreases. We can improve our server to admin ratios. We can improve our procurement cycles for buying of the hardware, improve our power efficiency, cooling efficiency of how we manage those data centers, and pass those savings on to you. It's hard to keep up with my slide. I was going to say we had 23 price cuts since 2006. We've now had 24 based on yesterday. So we've had 24 price cuts since 2006, which actually means we really do stand behind passing on those price savings that we get to our customers. So when you're connected to AWS, when you're part of that platform, you can expect ongoing price cuts. So kind of those are some of the, I guess, economic reasons why the cloud is fundamentally more cost effective and why some of those companies were able to achieve those cost savings. So we're going to take some of that and now turn it into some really kind of practical guidance. Before we do that, I think I'm going to hand over to you, Vladimir. Yep.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, good morning. This one?
Yep.
Good morning. My name is Vladimir Mitevski. I run the core services for Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters provides intelligent information for businesses and professionals in the various markets, from the financial markets to the law and regulatory to the tax and accounting, healthcare, intellectual properties. I live in the actual financial market, so as all of you hear day to day that the financial markets are being squeezed by margins, they're being squeezed by regulatory, and accordingly, those pressures are also put onto us. We specifically, in the area that I cover, our product actually supports about $2.3 billion worth of the revenue for Thomson Reuters. And accordingly, our platforms is built on a certain technology based on the history that the professional markets and the companies were there. So specifically, I had a use case where two parts of my businesses came in and they start putting a lot of pressure on us that we needed to deliver our platform in such a way that has to be able to cover a different spectrum of the professional markets that now are using more and more of Macs and iPads and Androids, etc. But our platform base is built on the Windows for a simple reason, as still 99% of the actual industry consumes the Internet Explorer, Windows, etc. So the pressure came in as the revenue started pushing on the sales guys to bring more business. Accordingly, the sales guys I'm getting our door shut. So it came to me, as I own certain parts of the business, to actually produce that particular delivery in a period of time, which was almost very hard to do. So we took a little step and we calculated. We say, okay, we'll do a little bit of innovation here. We tried to actually get our on-premise aspect, but the time frame that we had and the budget that it didn't exist because this was January of 2011. All the budget's already locked. Now I'm going to have a hole in my specific P&L. Therefore, we said, you know what? Let's experiment, and we experiment with actually on the Amazon, and we did a calculation. And when we launched it, it produced some stunning numbers for us, which kind of started opening our eyes. It's like how much more can we actually save, which means brings down the operational cost, which means aligns to exactly what our clients are asking us to do, reduce the prices, and obviously the businesses, they say, increase the margin. So we all faced with that. So with that, we actually produced it, and we got a good return on our investment for that particular product. So today what we want to present, and with Dan, he called me up. He said, can I run as a sample once the calculator was already out? He was like, can you give me how you're using it? So I was like, sure. Here's how many instances. So he was plugging in. I wasn't even watching it. And he was like, what is the number that you calculated if you were actually going to get it on your premise? And my numbers were very simple because I still buy a lot of hardware on-premise, and I do have a lot of the invoices that requires me to get exactly the same infrastructure. With that, I gave them the number, and he was like, let me show you. And the number actually matched. So I was like, all right. So he invited me to speak. So really what we're going to present today is we're going to take one of the projects that we already have in production. It's a simple, it's not thousands and hundreds of servers. It's actually only a few servers that we're using on Amazon.com, or AWS.com, I should say, and produce the cost savings for us. Now, what was more interesting is when my CFO, without even knowing the background, he came in and asked me, what is the Amazon bill? And am I going to get it recurring? So can you cut it? My conversation with my CFO is always, can you reduce this on everything? Regardless, even if it's a $5, can you reduce this? So I said, let me tell you actually that this is already reduced. So I showed him the actual invoices comparison if we did it in-house. And then the next statement was like, can you do more? I was like, all right. We have to do it in a very systematic way, in a very, not really a risk-taking way, because we still need to go through the certain governance with our clients, etc. On that aspect. So,
great.
Dan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So,
we can see your password.
There you go. Got it. Yeah, display. So what we decided to do, based on all these discussions we're having with customers, build a TCO calculator. A lot of people have built calculators, and they tend to be marketing tools. We built a tool that's not a marketing tool. This is based on hundreds of spreadsheets from customers. This is real cost savings. This is a way to think about all of the cost buckets. And the beauty of this model is you can dial it in, you can change the numbers, you can configure it exactly as you want, flip it upside down to make the cost savings however you want them to show. It's really a tool for you to think about all of the cost elements. We built this with Second Watch. They're going to come and talk. Kris is going to talk immediately after me. But I guess before I do that, I'd say I see a lot of interesting cost comparisons. I saw one just 2 days ago, actually. Someone basically said that they could, beat Amazon's AWS's costs, and they basically built a server and put it in their garage. And they looked just at the hardware costs. And of course, they hadn't really thought about redundancy, or the power, or the cooling, or the storage, or using reserved instances with AWS to reduce their bills. They hadn't really thought about the administrative costs of that, the maintenance, the software maintenance, the hardware maintenance. It's easy to do very bad cost comparisons. So this is really supposed to be, I guess, a thought-provoking exercise to help you think about the full set of costs that you actually do experience on-premise. One way or the other, everybody experiences them. They may be higher, they may be lower, but those costs are very real. Even if your servers are fully depreciated, and it's something I hear all the time, I have no cost to my servers, they're fully depreciated. guess what? At some point in a 3 to 5 year time horizon, you might have to buy new servers. So yes, you do have to think about some of the hardware costs as well. So there's all kind of cost models. This is an approach for helping you think about those costs. So I guess I'll give you a quick run through of this. This is available for you all to play with. aws.amazon.com/economics. Let me just give you a quick overview. So what you see here is essentially 7 simple sliders. And we're asking you to describe your planned on-premise infrastructure. How much on-premise stuff would you need to run that application? Either the existing application that you have or something that you're thinking of running. And we decided to start with a web application just for really one use case to demonstrate some of those cost elements. So these 7 simple sliders tell us about your number of web applications, servers, tell us about your number of database servers, tell us about your storage, tell us about your data center, what's in your data center, and guess what? A good cost model thinks about costs over time, a 3 to 5 year time horizon, because your infrastructure might change over that time period. You might have to buy new servers, so it's always good to kind of have some longer period of time. Administration, tell us about how many people touch that server or your networking or your operational infrastructure. And then tell us about your usage pattern. Your usage pattern doesn't matter in an on-premise world because you've got to plan for peak. It does matter for AWS because your usage pattern will allow you to change those resources depending on that usage pattern. So, I think when we first thought about this calculator, we realized that 7 simple sliders wouldn't be enough for a lot of our customers because they really want to dial this into their particular circumstances. So underneath the hood, we've got about 28 detailed configuration settings. So what we're going to do, kind of real time, Vladimir and me just went through this again yesterday. We populated his exact settings of exactly what he's done with AWS into this tool. So we're going to kind of pseudo reenact a discussion we literally just had in the tool to kind of see the cost elements, how we should think about those cost elements. So I guess the first question, Vladimir, is maybe just help me describe your environment. Describe what you were thinking of doing for this Thomson One application.
So this particular application that we actually did, it's using a commodity hardware, commodity web servers, which are we actually using 3 in this particular case. Standard, pretty standard, 2 CPUs, couple of cores, 4 cores in those CPUs. The memory is 8 GB these days for the commodity web server. The disk really is the operating system, so 30 GB, it's fine. We are Windows shop, and there's a reason why we're Windows shop. So it's 100% of the Windows, and of course because I do deal with end-to-end aspect of it. So maintenance costs, recurring costs, as I mentioned before, I do sit down with my CFO. So every time I get a bill for some maintenance that I need to pay, first question again, can we skip this? Which is understandable. So our maintenance cost is about 22% with a 15% discount.
And that's kind of an interesting one. I mean, you and I have talked about this particular slider a bunch. Maintenance costs exist. Someone's got to pay them. Your disks are going to fail. Either you have a contract with a third party to do it, or you have people that are going to maintain the hardware. And guess what? Maintenance costs really do exist for software too. And so, oftentimes this is not in the model at all. So one of the things we did with this calculator is said, you know what? It's got to be in the model. You can put it down to 10% if you want, but you're going to have to do some maintenance. That's just a reality of infrastructure. And then this discount thing is kind of a way to match that number that you see at the bottom right there, your dollars per server, with something that feels more like you. No, actually, mine is much more like 2,700. Mine's more like 2,000, whatever it is. So we kind of dialed this discount factor in to really approximate that $2,900 per server, which is the fully loaded cost of that server and the maintenance.
And we're a large company, so we get a pretty good discounts from all the hardware vendors accordingly, and anybody that comes from the large company gets better discount accordingly with that. So the numbers actually that you're seeing that we come out is really what I get on the invoices if I went in and procured that particular box. Then I needed I have another box which is a little bit bigger box, more really in the memory, but it is the same type of commodity box. It's one level above, which is actually extra large that we chose from the Amazon, but these are the settings, same CPU settings, same speed, 1.8 gigahertz. It's just using a 16 GB there. Of course, the 30 GB of the disk, and Windows is 100% that we're using. And really, the maintenance cost is exactly the same because that applies across the board for regardless of the box that we have.
And we dialed this discount in a little bit different, almost 15%. We put this up to 18%. This number felt more reasonable, including the maintenance cost that we just talked about.
To the invoice that I'm getting for this type of box that I buy. So what? This is the regular storage of the aspect. So we tune it up to exactly be as the SAN space that I have for my servers for redundancy, absolutely, and whatnot. So these are the actual numbers. I mean, we don't need to go through the actual the numbers on the storage, but those are the actual numbers that we get.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would kind of point out here is that. Storage is, there are many tiers of storage. So when you think about the storage, think about all of those tiers. You're probably doing backups. Doing tape backup has a cost associated with it. You may even have a contract with a third party to think of, to do that tape backup. The archival strategy needs to be included in your model for running that application. And with AWS, it's a very different model, which we'll talk about a little bit later, for providing those storage services than doing that on-premise. But in the on-premise world, yes, you're going to need some storage. That example of that server in the garage where this person beat the costs of AWS, great. Well, what are you doing with all of the data? Where is that going? How are you going to back that up? What's your redundancy and resiliency around the data?
So what we also did here, for the simplicity, we chose the single data center right now, so you can actually see the monolithic price. But obviously, you know how to do the math if you buy equipment for 2 data centers on that aspect. The network part is very interesting because we were going back and forth with Dan on this. First, he had it set for the telephone lines single. I was like, what are you talking about? We have redundancy. Actually, we have more than 2, but we said let's keep it as 2 to get it in, and accordingly the bandwidth. Now, I have this, obviously, I work for Thomson Reuters. I've been there for 14 years, almost 14 years. We have a pretty large data centers. We spend a lot of money on the heavy infrastructure. Therefore, we have dark fibers and whatnot. But I'm not using the bandwidth and the speed of the dark fiber because I don't need to. So we set it actually at the aspect of how much I'm using. And I do know exactly how much I'm using because I can see it. I mean, the way that the application is, and accordingly we set up for the slides for the maintenance, etc. So the growth rate. Now this one is interesting because we do see, as I said, I've been there for a long time. I know the application from the blueprint to what it is, and we do know also as I spent. More than 50% of my time actually talking to my clients, the banks, and I know what they're coming on, what they're firing people, are they going to reduce, are they going to increase? So I know my predictability where I'm going more or less in from the aspect of how I'm going to grow, and accordingly with that's what I do with all my infrastructure that I buy at my premise at the Thomson Reuters data centers.
And the reason we included that one in the calculator is, again, in the on-premise world, you're probably going to have to buy stuff in advance of when you need it. And so, having some sense of what that growth is going to be is important. When we talk about AWS, which we'll talk about later, you don't really have to do that same calculation of kind of this growth buffer, this idea. Yep.
Yeah. So, and the last one was administration. And the administration is actually the things that we take it for granted. But again, I'll speak purely from the experience, which is really the DBA people, the network engineering people. These are the guys, or the sysadmin guys, that actually take care of the bare metal of the box, the Windows patching and whatnot. So we included the 15% because there's an average standard out there that it goes 50 servers to one admin on average that goes high level. So we actually put it as a 15%. And the last one, which was the usage pattern, I know I know what my clients from the macro level will do for the next 12, 16, 18 months, but I don't know what they're going to do today. I don't know that like last week I would say, there was this, the Greek whole thing going on, and suddenly there was a big spike on the market. So these are the trends that as the market trades, as the people are more active, these are the things that are completely unpredictable for me from the spikes. So we chose the unpredictable aspect. Now, when I built everything that I built ×3, meaning, and you heard it in the keynote, is we have that wasted time that sits on it, but I can't do anything because I have to predict for that aspect of it. So with that being said,
so this is the magic bit. This is the bit that I had some fun with because I asked Vladimir what he said to his CFO. And we almost couldn't fake this. This is genuinely true. And Vladimir, what did you say?
So I said it's close to $77,000 just to start my project. And when he showed me, I was like, whoa, this is wrong. I said, you don't have a shipping cost included for the servers. So we picked on Kris, and I was like, Kris, you got to put also the shipping cost, and then you're going to get to the actual numbers. But these are real numbers of what we had. And now, what is most interesting for me was that, as you saw in my original slide, my bill is actually less than $1,200 a month. And why it is because now I've been running this thing for over a year. I launched it completely accidentally on November 11, 2011. We weren't planning. We were just pushing so much by the client, so they said just launch it. And now that we have information for such a long time, and it took me from January 2011 until the November to actually be comfortable with everything. And in that period of time, I was spending literally 20, 30, 50 bucks an hour, a month, which was nothing for me to get in. And then once I get into this stage, of course, I bought a much bigger boxes. Now, these are the numbers what I already settled, and I know that I don't need a bigger boxes than what I will consume today. And these are the numbers. But in reality, if I had to actually pull a CapEx, and it just happened that it was January, if it was a different time of the year when they asked me to do this thing, I would have maybe had the actual budget or money in the budget that I would have actually procured the servers. But the bottom line was it did do eye-opening for all of us, specifically for the business, because we solved the business problem. The clients were happy. We're generating the revenue. The sales guys went away from the noise that they were not able to sell it, and now it all starts asking a lot of questions for us internally. It's like, okay, is this are we living in the environment right now that I look at it very similar to 1995, where the internet started, where a lot of people are saying, no way, we're never going to have the trading like the brokerage firms, the traditional brokerage firms, like you're never going to do internet trading. We're always going to financial advisor. But guess what? The things did change, and there were a lot of people that realized there was a disruption in the trading system back in the 95 with the internet. Now we are looking at this as a disruption. We don't know how it's going to go yet, as nobody knows, but we're seeing the pattern that it's going into the direction that will save us money at the end of the day for all of us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Vladimir is a real innovator, so I think I learned a bunch through talking with him. I guess one of the ways that I knew he was an innovator is when I talked to him about servers, he's able to think about reserved instances. He recognizes that even though he's got that unsteady workload, uncertain pattern, that there's a certain piece of it that he's going to have to do reserved instances for and get that cost and get the ongoing cost savings associated with that. That fortunately, I think in your case, you actually had chargeback, so you actually had some visibility into things like administrative costs and knew that cost was going to come to you. The power and cooling costs are eventually going to come to you. A lot of companies don't have that kind of chargeback mentality and that visibility to that. So you're going to have to hunt out those costs to really kind of be able to find them, or kind of take some of the assumptions built into here around industry averages or what we've seen across the other customers to kind of get those numbers dialed in. There's a detailed PDF behind this because when you'll see these numbers, the first question is, wow, I don't understand, how are those savings calculated? What's in servers? What's in store? Why are you saying that for networking? Why has my networking cost gone down? And you'll see a lot of the assumptions around paying only for what you use rather than paying for this peak, and how those things map out in some pretty detailed, I guess it's a 20-page PDF. There's kind of 3 or 4 pages on each of these topics explaining what some of the cost differences are, how you can think expansively around them. So
yeah, let me just say last thing. So we use the one example here. I have multiple projects going on, and actually I did, after Dan told me about the calculator, I went in and I started plugging in other numbers, which I actually, recently I did upgrade a lot of my infrastructure in-house, and I have the invoices, I have the actual real things, and I started comparing it, and yes, of course, I'm good for sometimes for the certain products, but for the things that are coming end of life, or I need more capacity accordingly. We're actually looking at it as like, how do we go through it? And I ran the calculator several times for the other project, and they're coming, I mean, exactly very close to it. Of course, the number is never going to be perfect because you always have little things that you got to adjust. But 77,000 what I calculated and 76,343, it's then perfect comparing to the amount of dollars we spent in this particular project. But it's interesting. It's interesting what is happening in the world. And again, not about the Amazons per se, but there are other vendors out there that are doing these things, and it's eye-opening for a lot of the executives that we have out there.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
And with that ripple of applause, Kris, keep it going for Kris, and Kris is going to join us here. Thanks. Yeah, all set.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Stand there as well if you need it.
Great. Well, good morning. I'm happy to say that we're glad to be involved with the AWS team on building this TCO calculator. We've talked to hundreds of customers around what they're paying today, and using our experience on the IT buy side. I've been in IT for 20 years. I've worked for companies like Microsoft. And I can tell you that running and managing data centers is a complex, costly thing. And we're super excited to be here because AWS does a great job of simplifying that model for folks and also making it less expensive to run. And I think you've heard that from Andy and from other folks throughout the conference. SecondWatch is a premier AWS partner. So we help folks all the way from the strategy side of things around TCO, ROI, how to think about the cloud versus on-prem, to architecture, build-outs, lift and shift, all those kinds of things down to support as well. And then we do software around cost allocation, helping people understand how their spends are tracking both on the on-prem side with the TCO calculator and then also with AWS spends as well. And so we do a lot of work in that space. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are sort of behind the numbers, because I think part of the challenge of buying into this outside of Vladimir's piece, and Vladimir's and Thomson Reuters are not a customer of ours, so we appreciate sort of the independent validation, but also helping people think through, why is it different? Why is it so radically different? One of the things that we see when customers do cost comparisons to AWS is they typically aren't thinking about the same time horizon. And so when you are doing cost comparisons, you need to make sure that you're comparing servers to that 3-year, 5-year, 7-year life that you're going to buy those physical assets for. And when you do that, there's lots of opportunity to save costs on the AWS platform, both from a reserved instance perspective and also on-demand and spot instances. And then also you heard Vladimir talk about the maintenance piece. That's a common piece that gets left out of the equation. And I would also suggest that virtualization costs. So a lot of folks are running a virtualized environment today, whether you're VMware, Citrix, or Microsoft. There are maintenance costs for those licenses as well, and those are all included in the EC2 cost. So there's not a separate VM licensing cost that you have by running on Amazon Web Services. On the storage front, one of the interesting things that came out of a Forrester study around storage and storage in the cloud is that here's a great example of people buying for capacity. So typically when people buy storage, they buy it based on a 5-year peak or a 7-year peak. These are expensive things to run and manage, and actual utilization is typically under 60%. So here's a great opportunity to take advantage of the pay-for-use model that AWS brings to the table and really buy for what you're using. The other interesting piece around AWS for storage is that there's lots of different tiers associated. So with S3, you get your data replicated across 3 different data centers at a minimum. With RRS, it's at least 2. And then with Glacier, you've got long-term storage as well, and very inexpensively enabled for you. And so there's lots of different opportunities to take advantage of inexpensive storage on the platform. On the network side, here's another example of buying for capacity. So typically how folks, I've managed a lot of data centers in my career, and typically you're buying a certain level of capacity with some burstable points in there. And it's never based on your actual usage. And so that's one of the opportunities that AWS has to offer. They're buying a lot more bandwidth than typically most customers would buy individually. So one, they're getting cheaper costs, but also they're aggregating all that. You're getting redundancy sort of built into the platform. So you saw Vladimir talk about the multiple telecommunications providers. They obviously don't want to have a single point of failure so that if one of the telecom providers that they use goes down, their website's still up and running. All that's sort of baked into the Amazon Web Services platform for you. So it's tremendous cost savings on that side. You get that as part of the platform. On the environment side, Vladimir talked about the private data center. I want to talk a little bit about colocation. I know lots of folks use colocation providers, and one of the challenges there is that those data centers typically were built for equipment that was manufactured 10 years ago. And if you know anything about Moore's Law and how equipment continues to get more power hungry and how these things evolve and need more cooling, you start to realize that you're buying something that's old and it's going to cost you more to manage that. And so in a lot of cases, we find customers that run in colocation centers today and they have power overages. Because they're using more power than what the data center was actually originally designed for. They're not able to fill an entire rack. So they're paying for floor space, and they're using this stuff, but they're not actually able to use the entire thing because they can't get the adequate power or cooling to be able to do that. And so there's lots of challenges, again, paying for capacity that you're not actually being able to use. And so that's an interesting piece around that. And then lastly, on the administrative side, one of the things that we love about AWS is that everything is automated and you have sort of that full stack. And there are great tools, and I've certainly used a lot of them in my career, VMware, Microsoft, those sorts of things. The challenge is that if you look across the entire stack, so starting from the data center, the actual building itself, the network, the infrastructure, the servers, the storage, all these things together are automated in a common set of API with common permission sets. All the great things that AWS brings to the table makes it a lot easier to automate. And so with one click of a button with a CloudFormation template, I can deploy an application that has thousands of servers spread across multiple data centers, and I just have one button to push. And then I can also destroy that in one button push. And so it's a radically different model from an administration perspective running on the AWS platform. And we see a lot of cost savings for our customers using the AWS platform on the admin side.
So yeah, thanks, Kris, for sharing those experiences with us. It's great. So I guess the reason we wanted to have Kris talk is to show some of that real practical experience with those cost elements. They're very real. We've thought a lot about them. You can kind of see them all, you can see them all mapped out there. Those all go into that calculator and some of the ways that we think about those calculations. I'm going to kind of summarize, I guess, and then we'll have a little Q&A. I'm going to summarize maybe kind of a few of the bigger things that we talked about today. This first one is probably the most important, that with AWS you can plan for your usage, not for your peak. Usage means compute is charged on an hourly basis. Storage is charged on gigabits per month used. Network is just the data transfer out. So all of those kind of fixed ideas in the old cost model are very different. So when you do that cost comparison, if you take the old world model saying, this is how many servers we had, this is how much storage we had, this is how much network we had, therefore we need the same in AWS, then you kind of have the wrong kind of comparison, apples to apples, from the get-go. As you saw with servers in some of the keynote discussion, you might only need 30 or 40% of the server capacity that you had. With storage, you're never going to beat the fact that on-premise, you have to leave some growth buffer with your storage. Or you're going to be in trouble. You have to leave space for RAIDing, and overhead with your storage. It's hard to beat that 60% utilization of your storage on-premise. With servers, it's pretty hard to get above 20 to 25% utilization of your servers, and that's in a highly virtualized environment. Servers often don't have workloads at night, at the weekend. With things like auto-scaling, elastic load balancing with AWS, you can scale those servers down to a zero cost. And then this idea of paying only for what you use, is super important on bandwidth too. And the interesting thing about bandwidth is with AWS, the more bandwidth you use, the lower your tier of pricing gets. On-premise, it means you need to have a bigger agreement with your ISP provider. Oh, and you need to double that for the redundancy. So this is kind of important for doing kind of good cost calculations. Apples to apples is a different kind of mindset, I would say, when you pay only for what you use and not for peak. And then this idea of taking all of the fixed costs into consideration, and I'll extend that to take all of the costs into consideration. From a personal perspective, I don't mind what numbers you use for those costs, but think about them and include them in the model, because someone's going to pay for them. If your cost center doesn't pay for them, you're going to need to figure it out from another cost center, because when you go to AWS, those costs are included. So just in that little EC2 hourly compute charge, all of those things are baked in. All those things around admin are baked in. All those things about the license fees you might have to pay for VMware, that's baked in. So there's no kind of ongoing maintenance, that's all baked in. Similarly with storage costs, the replication, the redundancy, all of that stuff is baked in with your S3 cost. Thinking about the cost of running and administering your data center, that's quite hard to do unless you have some chargeback model or you're able to use some of those industry averages. And we talked about reserved pricing instead of on-demand pricing. I guess we can't emphasize that one enough. It's pretty easy to break even very quickly on reserved instances versus on-demand instances. If you take something like a medium reserved instance, that has about over a 3-year time frame, has about a 24% utilization break-even rate versus on-demand instances. What does that mean? It means you could use that thing for just 8 months of the 3 years, and it'd be more cost-effective than an on-demand instance. So when you're solving for cost over the long period of time, and you know that you're going to have that capacity requirement, then reserved instances is just a great way to reduce costs. That's what this session is about. The session is about how to help you guys save more money. So reserved instances is something that you guys should definitely look into. And then intangible benefits. I haven't talked about it much in the session today, but there are intangible benefits of AWS. This idea that NASDAQ could launch a new service. Vladimir could experiment and get this thing done. There's an advantage to having a low-cost infrastructure that you can scale up and scale down and experiment and take risks and fail and then try again. So there's some advantage that's in some cost model. I don't know how you include it. Some extra line item that says invisible, intangible benefits, but they can be very real. So finally, I'll kind of leave you with the reason we put on this session is to help you think about how much you can save with AWS. There's tools to help you. So I'd say, go and figure out for yourself how much you think you can save, change those settings, but I would encourage you to kind of think about all the cost elements we talked about today. So we've managed to leave a few minutes for Q&A. I don't know if we have like a running mic, do we, for